I'll go back to where we more or less started, I think in 2004, if I'm correct. This is a web dossier where you can find some of the findings that we came across over the years. The Living Archive is very much for us was a kind of abstract term that we use to umbrella for a whole set of different projects that we developed over the years to look at what web archiving in particular could mean in a place like the Bali. The Bali is of course well known as a center for debate. A lot of people in the Netherlands still associated primarily and almost exclusively with dysfunction. So debate, and we've been doing much more than that for I don't know 15, 20 years, but still people think of it as this debate center. And we're actually quite apart from the regular debate industry that is present in the Netherlands. But if you think about this notion of discussion and debate, social, cultural, political discussion and engagement, then I think that the term that sort of binds this in an interesting way together is conversation. And of course, how to document or archive conversation is quite a difficult and challenging question. And also because these social and political debates, when they function, sometimes they don't function at all, but occasionally we have a very lively debate happening in the space. And they emerge out of some sort of felt urgency of the moment. So the momentary is very much present in that. And the urgency also tells you something that it's connected to living processes. So it's not something that is like an object that is fixed, that has a certain set of material and physical properties that you can describe, and that fits within a certain cultural context out of which it emerged. This context in which we are working is continuously shifting. And I think that was one of the really interesting questions that we had to look at. So, quite recently actually we were asked, because one of the projects that we are doing, and I'll just briefly show you just very quickly, is the face of this website, web archive, called the Technical Media Files. It's a project that we are working on amongst others in collaboration with Portsmouth University, and was set up with David Garcia together, and Michiel van der Hagen, who is here as our CMS developer. So if you've specific questions you can ask him as well. And of course this university says, well, fine that you do all this practical work and that you build all these tools and so on, but they want some kind of theoretical foundation for this. So finally, 5 years after we started, we came up with a working definition for the Living Archive, which I would like to share with you because I think it captures some of these ideas quite well. The Living Archive, I'll just read this off the page, aims to create a model in which documentation of living cultural processes, archive materials, ephemera, and discursive practices are interwoven as seamlessly as possible. So that's the first idea, to bring these living and archive processes as seamlessly as possible together. Utilizing basically advanced online databases and content management systems and digital audio and video technologies. That's quite straightforward. But archiving here is understood as a dynamic, open-ended process that acts upon the present and future events and is simultaneously acted upon and rewritten by these events and their outcomes. So this is a really, I think, important question here. Like, how do you deal with these kind of living processes in relation to fixation, especially if you're talking about something like tactical media, which was always about intervention, hit and run, the sort of exactly the logic that contradicts archiving, that is very skeptical also of the politics of the archive and this canonization of culture, that wants to break the mainstream narrative. So how do you deal with this kind of processes, and how do you create turn them into something more dynamic, open-ended, as a structure, let's say. The living archive is thus understood, last sentence, not as an immutable repository creating a stable foundation for the production of meaning, but instead as an active discursive principle emphasizing the contingency of historical development. So this is the final idea that is really important to us, is that the archive, or this documentation process, should not try to enshrine a particular vision of historical development, but should rather work towards something that can show the open-ended character of this, and that historical development is indeed contingent and not predetermined by any kind of other general rule. We've been looking also at some theoretical sources, and of course I can't go into that very deeply, but just to point them out for you. One who is very important to us is still the archaeology of knowledge of Foucault, where Foucault says, you know, the archive, as he understands it, is no longer this collection of documents and objects, but it is a whole system, a system of rules that brings a collection into being, that constructs it in a particular way, and this system of rules is discursive in nature. So it's classically a part of discourse formation, and therefore, because discourse formation is always active and living, the rewriting is continuously there. And still there is something like the archive, in which something of this discourse, as it has existed in a particular time and in a particular domain, is inscribed, let's say, and it's exactly our distance to this inscribing that positions us as different, as living culture. Okay, the second thing is Jans Assmann, the Egyptologist who wrote a famous book about cultural memory, and he says, you know, cultural memory is really the idea that a certain narration of a culture's past is never for its own sake, but it's there to situate where we are now and where we are heading to in the future in a logical path where there is an implied necessity that the trajectory that we come from and the point where we are in present time sort of suggests that there is a necessary next step for the future. And this is a system of narration of history that is continuously used by all kinds of political movements to mobilize people, to create developments, to set things in motion. And of course the critical activity is to break this logic. And finally here we found also something really interesting that Letmanovic said about the database. So this is our third principal source. Just want to find that quote. Manovic really sees this, really sees this contradiction between the narrative and the database. And he says, as a cultural form, the database represents the world as a list of items, and it refuses to order them, to order this list. In contrast, a narrative creates a cause and effect trajectory of seemingly unordered items, events. Therefore, the database and the narrative are natural enemies. So the one refuses to order the list, the other implies a necessary order to the list. And for us then, also for this tactical activity, the interesting thing about what Lev has said about it is that the database, through its principled nature of refusing this narrative is a really good critical tool of deconstructing these kind of cultural memory narratives. And then it sort of fits with this tactical interventionist work that is typical of the tactical media phenomenon that we've been looking at. Yeah, I need to round off. So what we've been doing is creating tools in which the conversations that happen in our space are captured and where they can be retroactively annotated. Can't really show you much because we it's not my own machine. So you can endlessly annotate events that happened in space. And this creates the possibility of, we do live streaming of discussions and debates. They are captured. We bring them on the website, and retroactively you can annotate them. So you can continuously rewrite the meaning of this particular event and create relationships with dynamic, evolving information structures. And we've been doing that quite extensively now. There are well over 200 programs, usually 2 to 3 hours each. In the archive, it's a very small-scale initiative that a relatively small and underfunded organization as the BALI is developing. But it's one tool that can help to capture conversation as it evolves. We've been also looking at interfaces, interactive interfaces, where people can participate in the discussion during the live stream, make it visible in the space, among other in an experimental talk show, interactive talk show format called Cool Media Hot Talk Show. And there the idea was also that the discussion could start before the event, and that people could actually, through the discussion, actually program an entire event, so that the whole question of editorial control is completely readdressed. And then the last website that I just want to show the face of, is the Tactical Media Files, tacticalmediafiles.net. We recently had a data crash, and we haven't really restored all the data in the archive there at the moment, but it's growing fast again. There's well over 100 videos in there, a lot of text and other materials. And here we want to create not simply an archive, but a documentation tool. So we're looking at open editorial processes. And these open editorial processes are, of course, very well known from Wikipedia and other initiatives. And they rely on a very massive software structure that underpins this work and makes it possible for people to co-create such an extensive resource as Wikipedia and keep track of all the changes. But we were also struck by one thing that was said at a conference that we organized about a year ago by the founder of Ubu.com. What's it called? The avant-garde resource, avant-garde art resource, where it was asked, do you allow user contributions to your archive? And the founder said, no, absolutely not. We want no user contributions whatsoever, because our archive has the quality exactly because it is closed. And here is a really interesting, another dilemma in these kind of editorial processes. The one between editorial control and the politics of the archive and the quality of the archive in terms of its real content. So what we want to investigate with Tactical Media Files is a kind of shared editorial policy where we bring in other editors and where the editorial process is open, but you have to assume certain responsibility within the group of editors who ultimately construct this archive over time. So I leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Eric. Are there any questions? Quick questions from the audience? I just have one question myself. I remember when you told me a long time ago about this project, especially the Tactical Media Files, that other organizations would be able to use the same system. Have you any idea of whether that will happen or?
Yeah, but we are also working with V2 on a kind of follow-up project where we take this as the 0.1 version of the system. And now we're basically developing on two tracks at the same time. On the one hand, we are building on the MM-based open source content management system in the BALI. And V2 will be developing a similar initiative, but based on Plone, which is another large open source content management system. And ultimately, we want at the end of this follow-up trajectory release both of these systems so that they can also be used for web archives of whatever use other groups may have for them, but including the advanced video annotation, metadata, and other functionality that has been built for both archives. But that will take, I think, another 2 years because these are long-term projects.
Are there any more questions? I just wanted to point out, as Erik already said, David Garcia, who's involved in this project, Michiel here, and at the back, I see Arie Altena from V2, who also has a lot of experience in this field. He's in one of the working groups, so you can also discuss with them later if you're interested in this project. David?
I'm just interested in whether, there seems to be a distinction, which is often a contradiction, but not necessarily, between the emphasis on conservation and the emphasis on utilizing the power of archives, real-time access to data, to amplify the possibilities of conversation. And I think it's quite important for us as we go forward to be able to make that distinction, because I think there are two distinct communities in this meeting that I'm aware of: the people for whom conservation is a primary and vital and important goal that I'm sure future generations will benefit from all the work that they've done, but something like Living Archives, which focuses on the current capacities, technical capacities of archives to be able to, in real time, access information as you're watching live streams. So it seems that this combination of broadcast media and archival capacities, when they're combined, problematize traditional media distinctions, so that, as I think you said in an earlier lecture, nobody knows what television is anymore. And I think that's partly because of the new capacities that we have with contemporary archives.
Yeah, I take that as a comment more than a question. Yeah, I just want to emphasize, maybe as a closing remark, that what I, in way too little time, show you these kind of elements. They are elements of what could be a living archive. So I think that we need to bring all these elements that we have been working on together in a more or less comprehensive method, I would say, and to create a truly living archive. Because one of the things that is still problematic, if I follow on your comment, David, is that if you look at the Cool Media system that we developed for the talk shows, and we're redeveloping that now, and it will be launched in June as an independent platform that can be used by third parties. And this is really very much a discussion-oriented living process and so on. The archive is there, and everything that is captured by this system is automatically archived. But then the richness of the archive in terms of the depth of annotation, of selection, of making connections between things, or showing what the relationships are between certain texts, certain actions, certain artworks, and other things. That is much more present in a project like Tactical Media Files and all the ones that will follow on that. And we still need to think also conceptually still how to bring these two different modes of working together, like the one that is very much based on participation and involvement, and the other that is very much based on this quality and depth of understanding the materials that you are dealing with, that I think Ubu.com is doing really marvelously, and actually without a budget.